The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was a medieval torture device infamous for its ability to inflict extreme pain. It consisted of a sharply pointed wooden or metal pyramid fixed onto a sturdy base. A support structure with ropes and clamps was positioned above the device. Victims were stripped, and their limbs were tightly bound to restrict movement. A metal ring or harness was attached to the ceiling or wall with ropes to suspend the victim. Slowly, the victim was lowered onto the sharp point of the pyramid, causing immediate pain. The process was deliberately slow to extend suffering for hours or even days. The weight of the victim's own body pressed them further onto the sharp edges. Executioners increased the torment by tying additional weights to the victim's limbs. These weights forced the body downward, intensifying the penetration of the pyramid's tip. The pain was unbearable, but confessions were often demanded before the torture ceased. If a victim refused to speak, the torture continued with increasing pressure. Many victims lost consciousness but were revived to prolong the suffering. The crude nature of the device ensured that wounds were severe and deep. No antiseptic measures were taken, making infections almost inevitable. The Judas Cradle was never cleaned, accumulating bacteria from previous victims. Even if the victim survived the torture itself, they often succumbed to deadly infections. Survivors were left with permanent physical injuries, unable to walk or function normally. The psychological trauma of enduring the Judas Cradle was equally devastating. Some victims reportedly lost their sanity from the prolonged agony. This device was primarily used during interrogations to extract confessions. The slow, methodical nature of the torture ensured compliance through fear. The Judas Cradle was considered one of the most feared torture devices of its time. The infamous reputation of the Judas Cradle ensured that it was used sparingly but effectively. It remained a symbol of medieval cruelty and the inhumanity of torture methods. Over time, its use declined as more efficient methods of punishment were developed. The head crusher. The head crusher was a brutal torture device used for intimidation, interrogation, and execution. Prisoners often confessed before the device was even used, knowing the horror it could inflict. The executioners would begin by placing the prisoner's chin on the lower plank of the device. The upper metal cap was then placed on the top of the victim's head. Once secured, the screw at the top of the device was gradually tightened. With each rotation, the pressure on the skull increased exponentially. The first to succumb were the prisoner's teeth, which shattered under the force. As the device tightened further, the jawbone snapped next, causing unimaginable agony. The skull, no longer able to withstand the force, began to crack under the immense pressure. Blood vessels in the face ruptured, causing the victim's eyes to bulge grotesquely. With continued turns of the screw, the eyeballs would eventually burst from their sockets. At this stage, the victim would experience an excruciating level of pain and shock. If the screw was turned further, the entire skull would collapse inward. The complete destruction of the skull ensured death, often leaving the face unrecognizable. Even if the execution stopped short of death, survivors were left with severe disfigurements. The psychological terror of witnessing such an execution instilled fear among onlookers. The device was often used in public to send a strong message of deterrence. In some cases, it was used merely as a threat to extract confessions. Even tightening the device just enough to cause discomfort was enough to break many prisoners. Those unfortunate enough to experience the full effect of the device suffered an indescribable fate. This level of suffering was even worse than that of the infamous crocodile shears. The invention of the device demonstrated the cruel ingenuity of medieval torturers. Its use declined as more humane forms of execution became the norm. The iron chair. The iron chair was a brutal torture device designed to inflict maximum pain and suffering. It resembled a traditional chair with a tall backrest, armrests, and sometimes a footrest. However, every surface of the chair was covered with sharp metal spikes. The spikes were strategically placed to pierce the victim's skin when they were seated. The convict was forcibly strapped to the chair using belts and poles to ensure maximum contact with the spikes. The pressure caused the spikes to puncture deeply into the flesh, leading to severe pain and bleeding. Variations of the iron chair were widespread in medieval Europe, each slightly different in design. In China, a similar device featured large, sharp blades instead of spikes, increasing the brutality. The purpose of all these designs was the same: to cause unbearable suffering. Unlike modern practices like standing on nail-covered boards, the iron chair inflicted continuous, inescapable pain. Medieval spikes were much thicker and sharper than modern nails, causing more severe wounds. To heighten the torture, the chair was often heated with fire. The chair would be moved closer to open flames, or a fire would be lit directly beneath it. The metal would heat up, causing severe burns on the victim's already punctured body. Victims would suffer from both external burns and internal injuries as the spikes heated. In addition to the burns, carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire caused further agony. As the victim's body twitched from the pain, the spikes would dig deeper into their flesh. The iron chair was used for various crimes, including adultery, witchcraft, and murder. Despite its deadly potential, it was often used more as a symbol of intimidation. The mere threat of being placed on the iron chair was enough to force confessions. Executioners would remind prisoners of the iron chair to break their will. will. This made it one of the most torturous devices ever created. The iron chair remained in use in Europe until the 18th century. In China, similar practices continued until the early 20th century. The iron chair stands as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which humans have gone to inflict pain. Its horrific design and purpose reflect some of the darkest aspects of human history. Today, replicas of the iron chair are displayed in museums, serving as grim relics of past cruelty. The Brazen Bull. The Brazen Bull was a horrifying torture and execution device invented in ancient Greece. It was constructed by an Athenian named Perilos, commissioned by the Sicilian tyrant Phalaris in the 6th century BC. The device was a hollow statue made entirely of bronze, shaped like a life-sized bull. A hatch on the bull's side allowed the victim to be placed inside the hollow chamber. Once the person was secured inside, the hatch was locked tight, sealing them within. Torturers would then light a fire beneath the bull, heating the metal until it glowed. As the metal heated, the victim inside would begin to burn alive, their flesh searing against the hot bronze. The bull was designed with a complex system of tubes and valves in its nostrils. These tubes converted the victim's screams into sounds resembling the bellowing of an enraged bull. This gruesome design added an auditory spectacle to the already horrifying execution. The victim's skin would first blister and burn where it touched the hot metal. As the heat intensified, the air inside became scorching, burning the victim's airways and lungs. The victim would slowly cook alive, enduring excruciating pain before succumbing to death. Death typically occurred due to a combination of severe burns, suffocation, and heat stroke. In a cruel twist of fate, Perilos, the inventor of the Brazen Bull, was the first to be executed in it. Phalaris, the tyrant, decided to test the bull on Perilos, locking him inside and lighting the fire. Perilos's screams were transformed into the bellowing sounds, just as he had designed. Though Phalaris reportedly pulled Perilos out before death, he was eventually thrown off a cliff to die. After executions, the victim's charred bones were often collected and fashioned into jewelry. These macabre trinkets were sold in markets, adding another layer of horror to the practice. Its sheer cruelty made it one of the most feared torture devices in ancient history. The Brazen Bull served as a grim symbol of tyranny and absolute power. The device became infamous for its blend of physical torture and psychological terror. Throughout history, it has been cited as an example of mankind's capacity for cruelty. Despite its horrific nature, the Brazen Bull remains a notable artifact in the history of torture. Replicas and descriptions of the device can be found in museums and historical texts. The Ubet Torture. The Ubet, or oblase, was a cruel form of imprisonment designed to maximize suffering. It was a horizontal tunnel with no conventional exit, only a grated opening above. These tunnels were often used as dungeons, confining prisoners in extreme conditions. The tunnels were so narrow that prisoners could not even sit down. Positioned within castles, these dungeons forced victims to hear human voices and smell food. This proximity increased psychological torment as they suffered from deprivation. However, the real horror was that prisoners were often abandoned and left to die. Starvation, dehydration, and infection were the slow killers in these dark confines. Compared to the Judas Cradle, which caused swift agony, the Ubet prolonged suffering. The practice of confinement to death has existed across various cultures and eras. In ancient Rome, the Ubet was used against the most powerful Vestal virgins. These priestesses, sworn to celibacy, were sentenced if they broke their virginity pledge. Roman law forbade spilling their blood, so they were entombed alive instead. The doomed priestesses faced a desperate, slow death in total isolation. Such a practice wasn't limited to ancient history, but persisted for centuries. In Mongolia, this execution method remained in practice until at least 1933. The barbaric cruelty of slow urement left victims in a state of sheer despair. Without light or human contact, they were left to their own slow demise. Some variations included dropping food occasionally to prolong suffering. Many victims resorted to madness before their bodies succumbed to exhaustion. The sheer hopelessness of this execution method made it one of the most feared. With no way to escape, prisoners endured the most extreme form of isolation. Many civilizations saw it as a means to enforce absolute punishment. It served as a warning to others about the consequences of disobedience. The slow decay of body and mind made it one of history's most harrowing punishments. Its variations spanned across cultures, taking different horrifying forms. Even as time progressed, some societies clung to its brutal tradition.